Well, it's that time again when Kit Wood from the old grammar school joins us and takes us through the fascinating history of education in the country generally, but in Lewis in particular, because we have a particular school in the old grammar school, Lewis Old Grammar School, Logs, I think it's called.
Yes.
And which really came out of the Priory, and that was a long time ago.
Yes.
So, Kit, you've been very articulate about specifically the old grammar school, but what was happening in the rest of the country at that particular time?
What one tends to think of as private education nowadays, and I suppose historically, is based on the popular conception of the public school, the larger private fee-paying institutions and to some extent charitable institutions. But that was really not the case at the time in the early modern period when the old grammar school was founded. I think it's quite near the top of the list of foundations of schools. I think it's about 23rd in the country. And they were being founded rather thick and fast at that point in history, end of the 15th, 16th century and early 17th century. But public schools, not so much. There are a few that have, one thinks of Winchester, Eton, and so on, that go back to that period, or even slightly before. But the vast majority of the greater public schools are of much later foundation. And so small schools founded by charitable bequest were the norm for any sort of formal, institutionalized, as it were, education until the middle part of the 19th century, really, when the public schools sprang up, mushroomed up, and then following, I suppose that the governing class, having had the benefit of such education, felt philanthropically that it was important to give a wider swathe of the population the chance of formal education, and one sees the gradual foundation of universal state-funded education. But the public schools mostly are 19th and early 20th century foundations, whereas smaller schools like the old grammar, schools such as Stenning and Rye in Sussex. I was in St Albans recently and was interested to look at some of the history of the school there associated with the Abbey, really rather a similar history to ours, except that it has gone slightly up the social scale and become HMC, public school. But education in those early days was largely in small, fairly modest institutions such as the old grammar.
Now, I've asked you this before, but let's remind ourselves, what was the driver for the explosion? The schools sometimes, in the old grammar school, were 4 or 5 pupils, and then suddenly it was a school. What caused the greater interest in education for children?
It was, I think it needs to be seeded. The point is that the period of foundation of the schools, in which case people like our benefactress, Agnes Morley, felt that it was an important and worthy, and in fact, it was a work of good that would be beneficial to the health of her immortal soul, among other things. She needed to have gained an interest in and a feeling of the merit of education, of modern learning. And so I think that the dissemination of the new learning, as it was as it's described by contemporaries in this country and wider Europe, had to come, as it were, before the horse. And I suppose it's been the same ever since. People who are interested in their children gaining education must somehow have themselves got the idea that it has intrinsic worth, and that it is of benefit to their offspring to be given the opportunity to be educated. Without that, without any knowledge of at all of the benefits of education, well, of formal education delivered in institutions such as schools, then there wouldn't be any drive towards it, and schools wouldn't be successful or full or anything, any such thing. So I think the interest has to come from schools that were founded initially by pioneers, by innovators and creative people who were exploring and rediscovering learning on their own. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Were those early schools in place just for the satisfaction of having learning, or was there an end aim? Were scholars getting positions, as it were, as a result of getting an education?
Well, I think that's always been the case. It's also very often seen as part of the way people socialize and expand their social circles. They in that horrible verbized noun, they network, and I think schools very much help with that. Somebody who's attended a school may very well favour schoolmates, fellow alumni, in pushing them towards courses and so on. And I think in a wide variety of ways, apart from acquiring knowledge for its own sake, which of course is rather satisfying, I think it was seen to be beneficial to youngsters to be given that opportunity to advance further their careers, further their creativity as well, in most cases. But I sometimes find myself questioning whether schools still quite deliver that. They quite introduce young people into the ways of inquiry and the ways of exploration. I don't want to single out a particular part of the common curriculum in place nowadays, but it was a subject I didn't enjoy much at school, and that was chemistry. Now, the history of chemistry is absolutely fascinating, and it's to do with pioneering, discovery, experiment, and so on. I'm not sure that the way it's delivered, and many other subjects are delivered, really encourages that. There isn't really any inquiry until people are well on into tertiary education. It's just learning about what other people have discovered and innovated. I'm not sure that's quite as helpful as the founding fathers of the education system. I'm not sure that's quite what they intended it to be. I think we've hopped back to sort of education that the monasteries delivered of let's just learn about the scriptures and Thomas Aquinas, and no, there's no place for exploration or original thought. But if you do that, you're being a naughty student.
Actually, you strike a chord there with me, because I was lousy at mathematics, but it was I sailed through my GCE O-level because I had a master who understood, treat him like a parrot, and they'll come out at the other end and sound like a parrot and pass. But I got to university, and I went to university in North America, so the so-called liberal curriculum, and I opted for mathematics because I passed mathematics at school, and I was completely and utterly lost. It had no concept whatsoever of what the hell it was all about, and didn't have any desire to carry on because it was so. Now, is what I went through at school and what I faced at university were two totally separate things. So, was it school or university that was letting me down, or were they both just challenging me?
Your own choice or any advice you were given to opt for mathematics may have been faulty.
Yeah.
I would like to think that your schoolmaster, who treated you rather like Polly the parrot, was at least providing you with the basics of the vocabulary of mathematics, so that you, well, to put it at its simplest, you were easily able to understand that it wasn't particularly easy for you when you were invited to start to think about it and be less channeled along the learning corridor.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important that people are given the basic vocabulary of their language, a core curriculum as we now have to think of it. I think it's very important at this basic level. I wonder, I'm not particularly supposed to ask you questions, I suppose, but
yeah.
Do you have an interest in, a theoretical interest in mathematics? If one reads about some sort of breakthrough or innovation, does that interest you?
No, but I really think that my perception of mathematics is that it actually drives an awful lot of things, and that I was never really aware of that. To me, it was all about algebra and arithmetic and so on and so forth. And as long as I understood that, I understood everything. As opposed to, Beautiful Mind, the movie, is when you see them working things out, having a clue what's going on, but you think, bloody hell, how did they actually come to the conclusion that they did with these figures and symbols and so on? In other words, the movie started at least inquiry in my mind, when I might well have thought, wow, this is exciting stuff, but I didn't, because I was being pushed to pass an exam.
Well, the fact that it's there is in all our consciousnesses now. It isn't such a closed book that we know nothing at all about it. But I agree that when one sees a chalkboard completely covered with indecipherable mathematical symbols and so, or for that matter, chemical formulae, and so it is pretty much double Dutch. But I suppose one knows if one's dabbling along the edge of it. I suppose it's a bit like not really having learned Italian, but being able to ask where the station is. And but in fact, if one were presented with an advanced text, it might be, I don't know, perhaps you're fluent in Italian, I'm not.
No, I'm not fluent in anything. Actually, a liberal education is North Americans prefer that than a specialist education, because they think that you get a little bit of a lot of things, and that it broadens the mind. Whereas we tend to, even at A levels, go specifically to three and associated disciplines. I'm not sure that I was well served with
No, it's a very frequently recurring question, isn't it, as to how broad the curriculum should be for those people at the end of secondary education, A levels, or should there be a wider choice? Ideally, because I think a different recipe would suit different people best, and I think it's just the practical problems of offering a choice of how specialised one is at 16 plus. It's just not really possible for in an individual school to say, well, you can either choose to continue with 6 subjects or you can narrow it down to 3 or 2. It really isn't practicable. And it is a great pity from the point of view of what an individual might find suits her.
In my day, the one thing that I did realise was value was that you only had the sort of 3 classes a day, as opposed to the 6 or 7 that you have at the lower school, and that you started to make up your own mind about what you did. You would start to go to the library to look up stuff independently of the schoolmaster directing you. That you did start to get an inquiring mind in that 6th form, and I thought that was particularly useful. I mean, I actually read half of War and Peace.
Yes, I did exactly that. It was quite a hot summer when I was supposed to be revising my O levels, and I sat in the front garden and read War and Peace. Why not? That is what that independent inquiry, which isn't necessarily straitjacketed by the demands of the course, that is what we are constantly enjoying to instill in 6th form students. It's very, very important indeed. It's because of the demands of league tables and performances from government, from parents, quite understandably from the students themselves, to achieve good grades in an increasingly competitive and difficult market for places on courses or for careers. It's very important to keep pointing out and encouraging youngsters to be inquiring and to think a bit around, a bit outside the box, rather than just revising from the course book.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm putting you through a 3rd degree, really, but I mean, we scratched the surface by looking at logs, and I think going into a fascinating area is the curriculum that we have at the moment up to the to O level, just purely reading, writing, arithmetic. These are the things that will get you the job. And you go into the 6th form, and that's when your mind begins to spread out. Or is that just Hayes's interpretation of it?
It isn't just Hayes's interpretation. I think it's an easy, if I may call it that, an easy trap to fall into. The fact that up to the GCSE level, that's to say, the examination at 16, the qualification that people are aiming for at the age of 16, and up until that point, it's quite easy for people to fall into the trap of thinking that it's just about learning enough to pass the exams. What one can hope is that it isn't just then suddenly you flick a switch and the very next September, having gone into 6th form or into a further education college, that they're all suddenly going to possess inquiring minds, which they didn't have before that. not the case. It's a gradual growth. One ideally would like to encourage the inquisitive and the creative thinking and so on, right from the earliest possible age, and let that grow in people. It's much more beneficial if they're not expected suddenly to be inquiring beings, having not been expected to do so before. That's the aim, but pressures of time and demands of examinations, that's sometimes put on the back burner a bit. Sadly.
How do you personally assess people like Churchill who were rotten at school and yet actually turned out to be lateral thinkers? I mean, it's turned upside down. I mean, is that just he was an unusual child, or did he benefit from some particular streak in the educational system that gave him that opportunity?
Well, there are a couple of, there are probably 100 views, no, there are probably thousands of views about Churchill's educational years. And one I favour, I've forgotten the name of the historian, he said that the problem was with people like Churchill that there was really no requirement for him to do well at school. There was nothing to be gained.
Right.
And that his father, being a bit dysfunctional, shall we say, who he didn't pay a great deal of attention to his children's education, I don't think. And so that there was nothing to be gained for young Winston to excel at school in the ways that they would have hoped he would. But he certainly learned a lot at school. He developed his skill of very classically formed, rather rousing rhetorical way of writing that was very effective, and I think that transferred to his speaking as well. But no, he didn't take a great deal of interest in ticking the boxes. It is a problem. It didn't matter to Winston Churchill, really. In fact, it may well have helped him because he, as soon as he left school, he launched a very interesting and varied career, journalism, for example. But it does matter for some people because it excludes them from really, or makes it much, much harder for them to pursue further education or to find rewarding and promising careers. It's a very hard balance to strike. To what extent one should coerce children into meeting the requirements of strict exam-based curriculum at the expense of
That's the beauty of broadcasting from a pub, is you get everybody from the window cleaner to somebody who tells you to bugger off. Another aspect of education is quite often people who aren't doing particularly well at school come out with X amount of certificates, and then they go into work and so on. And then at 30 or 40, they suddenly wake up and charge off to night school or even quit their job and go back to school and so on. Why are there latecomers, apparently quite clever, but they hide it, or it doesn't flourish until quite late in life?
I suppose at an individual level, that's a bit like the the expansion of thirst for knowledge and learning in the first place, or rather in the period we've been discussing. The fact that there must have been pioneers in society as a whole who seeded the idea of learning being important. Something will have happened to such people who want to go back to learning. Something will have triggered that. I remember reading an extremely heartwarming story of an elderly man in Bengal, a farmer, who I think he was well into his 80s, if not 90s. And he went back to primary school because it suddenly occurred to him that he'd missed out. And he was an extremely popular figure with his classmates. And it was rather quaint to see a photograph of this old gent sitting on the school bench with all these little nibblers. It was one of those short inside page articles. I would have quite liked it. I might follow that up, actually. Fascinating as to how he's getting on. But yes, it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon. I must say, I'm not anything like as impressive as he is, but I feel the lack of my knowledge of chemistry, and I feel rather guilty at having taken so little interest in it, because it's such a fascinating subject, and it's rather on my list as to something I'd like to delve into a bit.
What I find is that for one reason or another, I take a view at say 16 and think, no, that's not for me, and I don't even probe it. And then when I'm 30, suddenly I think, bloody hell, that's interesting. And as you say, not only feel guilty, but think, oh, what a pity I missed out on a number of years, and finding out about this. Do you find that?
Well, I do, but sorry to do this to you twice, but I think again you're in danger of falling into a trap which you're not alone in, and it's that a 16-year-old is a member of a homogeneous species. A 16-year-old is a member of a group that's just as varied as an 80-year-old or a 5-year-old. In that demographic, if you like, contains the complete gamut of needs and states of mind and so forth. I remember there's a bloke I bumped into recently who, at the age of 16, was incredibly mature in his judgment, and although he got a string of grade A's or whatever the equivalent was at GCSE, a former pupil of the old grammar school, and did particularly well in the scientific and mathematical subjects. My colleagues in those subject areas were desperate for him to stay into the sixth form so that they could lead him through A-levels, at which he would have excelled. He was absolutely single-mindedly made up to the fact that he wanted to train to be a farrier, which he did, and he is now proprietor of a very successful business of farriers and general horse hoof fettlers. It isn't that people at the age of 16 don't know what they want to do. It's just that but I think more choices become available to people as their experience widens. I don't think that's necessarily the fault of a grumpy 16-year-old who doesn't find much enthusiasm about anything. But there are such. I think it's because they've been rather straitjacketed. I'm just making negative criticisms of the school system as it is, but it's easy to do. It's very hard to conceive of a model that that's different, that doesn't close people down quite so much in their middle educational years. Very hard to conceive of how that could be done practically. And so I'm just, really in a rather lucky position of being able to knock it down without having to suggest a viable replacement.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I don't mind you prodding my straight-jacketed mind, if you like, if it helps people to understand, how we develop. So by all means, poke me and sort of say, I hate to do this to you, but I do think that in many ways, for instance, I knew that I wanted to be a broadcaster when I was 13, but there was only one station, and it was populated by people of a certain class. So in some ways, I pushed the idea out of my mind, but I didn't fill it with anything else. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I went to North America, and in some ways, it was a saving on me for doing what I wanted to do, because there it was a whole different kettle of fish. There were lots of opportunities, not in as sophisticated organizations as the BBC. But nonetheless, it gave me my opportunity, even though because I had an English accent in an American country, I had to fight much harder than others. But here, it was still, when I came back in 1975, it was still fairly elitist.
Yes.
And so a bunch of people were kept out of it. I'm not a bit surprised that people went off to work for pirate radio. It was an opportunity as much as developing something new and different. But what I was going to say is perhaps in our next session together, you would actually articulate what you think needs to be filled in the educational system, even if it's an impossible dream. I mean, if you think that, for instance, we should take every school child up to the space platform, a total impossibility, but that would actually help the educational system. I'd be fascinated to hear, because I recognise that you've been in education all your life, but also you're a thinker, and you actually I've never known a teacher who understands the educational system of the past, the present, and to some extent the future the way that you do. It's part of your soul, and I think that it would be very interesting to see how you think things should develop, because we are in an age where things, radical things, is Tom Paine notwithstanding, can be developed, and I would be interested to see. I don't want you to lose your job, because then it would be very useful.
So, well, I'd be glad to do that. By the way, that holds very little fear because I shall be retiring quite soon anyway. So it would only just be pushed before jumped. Well, yes, I'd be glad to do that because there's little or no prospect of my becoming Secretary of State for Education, because I think most of my colleagues in education would not thank it when departments for education feel the need to interfere and meddle and change things yet again and so forth. But yes, I'll be glad to.
Oh, good, excellent,
excellent.
Yeah. Let's see. Yes, we've just done 28 minutes, which is
very well.
Not bad. And so we'll see you in a week, 2 weeks today.
Fortnight.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you. I mean, we've actually ranged through a whole host of things today.
Well, we have. Yes.
And I found fascinating. And in some ways, I've never really had the opportunity to sit down with educators and sort of close the doors and the windows and say, okay, let's talk it through. And so I'm finding this particularly fascinating and useful. Yeah. As you are. Okay. Well, it's Kit Wood, and we're back tomorrow morning. Yeah, but she can go into the United States as well.